Edward once cherished his Surrey home. He had built it brick by brick with love, filled it with laughter, warm dinners, and the sound of little footsteps. He could still remember the bright curtains Margaret had chosen, the roses they planted, and Amelia's giggles echoing through the garden. But time had turned the house into something colder. Now, at 72, Edward often sat silently in his worn armchair, watching the world outside. The home he built was alive with the hum of life, cars passing, children playing, yet inside dust motes danced in the stillness, undisturbed by movement. It was a house holding its breath, waiting for someone who would never return. He saw Amelia moving through the rooms like a specter, her footsteps heavy, her words sharp. She was a ghost haunting the halls of a life they once shared. At 72, Edward often sat silently in his chair, feeling more like a stranger than a father in his own home. His daughter, once the apple of his eye, now treated him as though he were a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Every corner held a memory, yet each one was tainted by Amelia's bitterness. The floral wallpaper in the hallway, the same wallpaper she had picked out for her school project. He remembered her showing it to him proudly, her eyes shining with accomplishment. The old grandfather clock in the living room chimed softly, its melody a constant in the house when Amelia was a child. He recalled how she would stand mesmerized, listening to its chimes, her tiny hand resting on his. Even the fireplace in the drawing room, where they had gathered for countless family gatherings, now seemed to mock him. It was a silent witness to a love that had died, a love he could no longer afford to ignore. Each day, Edward woke up before the house stirred, before the chill of the morning seeped into his bones. These early hours were his solace, a stolen moment of peace before the day began. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, but it brought no comfort. Sitting in the quiet house, he felt a profound sadness, a realization that the warmth he craved was no longer there. He searched for the source of this emptiness, tracing the lines on the wallpaper, the cracks in the ceiling, as if seeking answers in the house's aging skin. These four walls, once echoing with laughter, now whispered of loss. Each room was a mausoleum of memories, preserving the echoes of a life that had vanished. Then Amelia would enter the kitchen, her steps heavy, her presence casting a shadow over the room. This was their ritual, a dance of avoidance they had perfected over years. She was always in a hurry, rushing through the house like a storm, leaving behind a trail of chaos and discontent. This morning was no different. "You left the kettle on again," she snapped, though Edward had not touched it that morning. He lowered his eyes, murmuring an apology anyway. "This isn't your house anymore," she continued bitterly. "You just sit here, wasting space, draining everything I've worked for." Her words were barbs piercing the fragile shield he had built around his heart. And Charles, her husband, stood smirking at the edge of the room, saying nothing, silently agreeing with her cruelty. Edward knew better than to argue. The years had taught him that reason had no place in this house. Their cruelty was a language they understood too well. After breakfast, Edward retreated to his room, the sanctuary he had made out of habit rather than choice. He sat on the edge of his bed, clutching a faded photograph, the only warmth left in a freezing world. The picture showed a smiling Amelia on her first day of school, her hand resting on his. The carefree joy in her eyes mocked him now, reminding him of a love that had been lost. He traced the lines on her face, memorizing the features that had become distant, her frown, the way her hair framed her face, the tilt of her chin. It was a desperate attempt to hold on to her, to push back the encroaching darkness. The house was suffocating him, and he longed for the open sky, for the feel of sun on his skin, for the sound of laughter that didn't carry the weight of sorrow. Days blurred into weeks, each day colder than the last. Edward watched the seasons change through the window, the vibrant greens of summer yielding to the stark browns and grays of winter. It was as though nature itself was mirroring the landscape of his heart. The garden he and Margaret had nurtured together was now overgrown, The roses they planted replaced by weeds. Even the birds that once filled the trees with song seemed to have abandoned the house. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the old grandfather clock, counting the seconds until spring. One particularly bleak afternoon, as rain lashed against the windows, Edward sat staring at the floor. His hands, gnarled with age, trembled slightly, betraying the turmoil within. Amelia entered the room, her face pale in the dim light. Seeing her father like this, so frail, so defeated, stirred something in her chest, a flicker of the daughter she once was. For a moment the harsh lines softened, her eyes losing some of their bitterness. But it was fleeting, a momentary lapse before the mask of resentment returned. She knew he was hurting, but the sight of her father's pain did not bring her remorse. It brought memories of a childhood overshadowed by his failures, of a home where sacrifices were made and dreams were shelved. She had lived in the shadow of his regrets, and now he was reaping the consequences. He had made his choices, and she had no sympathy for his regrets. Her anger was a shield, protecting her from the ghosts that haunted this house, the ghosts he had brought with him. In the fading light, she saw not a broken father, but a reflection of the past, a past she was desperate to escape. "Why?" he whispered, the question echoing in the vast emptiness of the room. Why had she become so cruel? Why had she allowed this icy grip of resentment to consume her? Why did she treat him like a stranger in a house that was his and hers? Tears welled up in his eyes, threatening to spill over, but he blinked them back, refusing to show her his pain. He was tired of being pitied, tired of being judged. As the rain intensified, drumming a mournful rhythm on the roof, he realized he might never get an answer. Their relationship had become a closed book, the pages filled with words he could no longer read. In the twilight of his life, he found himself in a strange land, cut off from the warmth of human connection, surrounded by the ghosts of a life he no longer recognized. The house, once a testament to his love, had turned into a prison of his own making, and as the darkness crept in, he knew there was no escaping the shadows of his past. This is an extract from a novel I'm writing called The Last Days of Summer. Can you write a story in 48 hours? Well, thank you for watching, and thank you for your comments about this piece, and if you'd like to hear more about my writing process, please do subscribe. So this is what I wrote in response to the prompt. What happens to our stories when we can no longer tell them? Now, there are many ways to interpret this prompt, and I wanted to see where my subconscious mind would take me. So I began writing without planning, and I discovered this idea of a man whose wife is slowly taking away his agency, his independence, and, in doing so, discovering the power of storytelling and memories. Now, as I delved into the story, I found myself exploring some universal themes such as loss of identity, the struggle for autonomy, the significance of storytelling, and the resilience of the human spirit. I wanted to depict how these can shape our lives and affect those around us. As the story progressed, I also wanted to examine the complexities of family relationships and how they evolve over time. So I hope I've created characters with whom you can empathize and care about. I chose to title the extract An Odd Funeral, which reflects the central metaphor of the story, which is that of an individual stripped bare of their essence. And as the story unfolds, they conduct a ceremony of sorts around the fragments of their former life, symbolized by the broken cup. Through this metaphor, I aim to communicate a profound sense of loss and dispossession experienced by Edward as he grapples with his diminishing role within his own home. This concept of conducting a funeral serves to highlight the solemn tone of the narrative while emphasizing the emotional weight of Edward's situation. The title is also intended to intrigue readers by setting the stage for a poignant and introspective exploration of grief and recovery. By drawing attention to this unconventional ritual, I hope to draw the reader into a world of muted sorrow and resilience. Another aspect I wanted to explore was the power of storytelling. Storytelling has the ability to transport us to different worlds, allowing us to experience different perspectives and emotions. So I hope that through this story, you gain insight into Edward's inner thoughts and feelings as he navigates the challenges he faces. Storytelling also plays a significant role in preserving and transmitting culture and traditions. And I wanted to convey how stories can act as a lifeline to our past, providing comfort and continuity in times of change and uncertainty. Throughout the story, I aimed to create vivid imagery and sensory details to immerse you in the world of the characters. Vivid descriptions of the setting, characters, and their emotions can evoke empathy and understanding. As I prepared this piece for publication, I took some time to reflect on the craft of writing and storytelling and consider what makes a compelling narrative. One crucial aspect is pacing. It's important to keep the story moving forward and to maintain engagement. To achieve this, I used techniques like foreshadowing to hint at future events and creating conflict and tension to keep the reader guessing. Another key element is dialogue. Writing realistic and engaging dialogue can bring characters to life and advance the plot. So I paid attention to how the characters speak and interact with each other, making sure it sounds natural and reveals their personalities. During this reflective process, I also considered the importance of showing rather than telling. Instead of simply stating facts about the characters or setting, I tried to show the reader these things through the use of action, dialogue, and sensory details. This technique allows the reader to experience the story more fully and connect with it on a deeper level. In conclusion, writing this piece has been a rewarding experience, allowing me to explore themes, craft, and style. The process of reflecting on my work has helped me to appreciate the complexity and creativity involved in storytelling. And I hope that through my writing, I can entertain and engage readers while also provoking thought and discussion about important issues. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the themes I explored, the way I used language and imagery, and whether or not the story resonated with you. Your feedback is valuable to me as a writer, and I'm grateful for your willingness to engage with my work. Thank you for joining me on this creative journey, and I look forward to sharing more of my writing with you in the future. Hi, everyone. Please welcome our new member, Grace. She's 7 and loves to draw. She drew this for me. Isn't it nice? Thank you, Grace. Edward paced the narrow path, his boots crunching on gravel. Memories clung to this place. Every tree and wall echoed with shared laughter. First steps, hand-squeezed games, promises whispered beneath a sky now scrubbed clean of stars. He was returning not as son or grandson, but alone. His shoulders drooped with the weight of years and losses. The front door was new. Gone was the paint-peeled wood he and his brother had wrestled open during hide-and-seek. And gone was the welcome that had met him there. In Amelia, he saw a stranger. Where once a child had run to greet him, now a woman stood barring the way. Her eyes, though, held the same startled blue as his sister's, and that startled him more than anything. "What do you want?" Her tone was clipped, defensive. "Just to see the house," he said, surprised by the tremor in his voice. It sounded like a plea rather than a statement. "It's nothing to you anymore." "It still has my name on it," he said quietly. That startled look flickered again. Then Amelia stepped aside, gesturing with a sweep of her arm. "Come in, then. Come in, but don't touch anything." A shiver ran down Edward's spine, not of cold, but of foreboding. If only he could tell her. If only he could make her understand. But what would be the point? She wouldn't listen. Inside, the hall was bare, stripped of furniture and family pictures. It felt alien, echoing his own strangeness within. Walls seemed closer, shadows deeper. This wasn't a house, not anymore. It was a cage containing ghosts. Amelia moved stiffly through the rooms, explaining changes she had made. "It's more modern," she said of the carpetless floors and bare walls, but Edward saw emptiness. In her back, he saw a shield, a barrier. He wanted to reach out and touch her shoulder, to connect, to wake something in her eyes, but he knew it would be futile. He wasn't her brother anymore. In the kitchen, he stopped. The worn table was gone. In its place sat a box filled with objects. He recognized some of them, though. The chipped teapot, the mugs bearing faded coffee stains, the old spice rack hanging crookedly. He knelt, his fingers hovering over the box as if afraid to awaken something by its movement. "Some things I couldn't bear to throw out," Amelia said softly. That startled look returned, fragile and fleeting. Then she was gone, hurrying from the room. He opened the box, releasing a musty scent that brought tears to his eyes. Lifting a chipped mug, he traced its contours as if memorizing its shape, drinking in the essence of it, knowing that soon it would exist only in these phantom senses. He wandered into his old room, where sunlight fell on the unmade bed. Dust motes danced in the sunbeam. He walked toward it, hesitant at first, then with growing boldness. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender. He lay down and buried his face in the pillow. No, not his pillow. Her pillow. Why did he keep hoping she would remember? Hope was a brittle thing, easily crushed. Yet he kept crushing it underfoot, and it kept springing back. A shaft of sunlight fell through the attic window, illuminating a corner of the room. Edward followed it, finding a dusty trunk. He recognized it instantly. He and his brother had played pirates, hiding treasures in the lining, burying secrets in its musty depths. What treasures did it hold now? Curiosity warred with fear. Curiosity won. Edward lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled among yellowed fabric, he found a leather-bound journal. He blew off the dust, recognizing his father's strong hand in the penmanship. Each page contained neat columns, figures adding up to form tales. Beneath them, a scrawl of a signature. John Bramble. Was this the key to something? He opened it to a random entry. Figures swam before his eyes until he focused on the sum at the foot of the page. Beneath it, a note. Enough for a new roof. Edward flipped through the pages. It was a record of the years, their ups and downs charted in ink. He glimpsed entries marked with asterisks, hid money in boot, worried frown lines etched deeper, added more shifts. Another with just 2 words, "Hope remains." He felt a presence behind him and turned to find Amelia standing in the doorway. "What are you doing?" she demanded. He closed the book quickly, his heart pounding. "Nothing," he whispered. "I was just looking." "Looking for answers, for reasons," she spat. "Stop wasting your time. Nothing's left here for you." He looked back at the book, its worn leather spine, the numbers holding their silent vigil. He felt a surge of protectiveness, of responsibility. He had to protect this legacy, these stories of struggle and resilience, the quiet tale of his parents' hopes and dreams. "Why did you bring me here, then?" he asked quietly. She flinched, then turned away. "To show you that it doesn't matter anymore. All those memories, this house, none of it matters anymore." "But why?" "Because," she said finally, her voice cracking, "because there's nothing left." The word hung between them, stark and undeniable. What had been lost? Their childhood, their parents, their connection to one another, and, most importantly, to themselves. He picked up the leather journal, its weight oddly comforting in his hands. "Don't let it end here," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He knew he couldn't stay. This house was a tomb, sealing memories under its floorboards. He hugged the journal close and started down the attic stairs. As he passed Amelia, he hesitated. "Goodbye," he said softly. She didn't respond, but he saw the flicker of emotion cross her face. Outside, the wind had risen, swirling fallen leaves in frenzied dance. The air was sharp with the smell of rain. Edward hugged the journal to his chest and hurried home. He had to write, to use his father's ledger to record his mother's story. Maybe that way he could keep them both alive, their struggles and their hopes, the whispers of their voices in the grand arithmetic of love. "Hi, I'm here. And today we're going to look at this story." When reading it, ask yourself these questions. How does the author use language to create an image of Edward? What literary devices does the author use to portray the story? How does the relationship between the characters deepen throughout the story? And what is the significance of the title? There was a time when Edward was a force to be reckoned with, a leader who commanded respect and admiration. But those days were gone, reduced to a faded photograph pinned to the mantelpiece. Now his wife, Amelia, treated him like a shadow, ignoring his presence as if it were a stain on the carpet. Their son, Charles, never invited him to their home. And all that remained of Edward's former glory was a tarnished, silver-framed picture of him in uniform, the only evidence that he had ever existed beyond the hearth. He wasn't always invisible, unimportant. Years ago, his name had echoed through the halls of government. Now it was swallowed by the whispers of the wind. One day he noticed that his glasses were loose, the frames creaking like bones. It happened so often that he should have known, but he hadn't. Why wouldn't he know? He thought, defeated. Vision blurred, and instead of compassion, he received scorn. He fetched tape, patching the frame like a child repairing a toy. "I'll manage," he murmured, though his sight was dim. He stared at the blurred outline of the mantelpiece, recalling Margaret's smile, sharp in memory, if not in view. He realized vision was more than lenses. It was seeing truth. And the truth was clear. His daughter had lost her tenderness. He pressed the taped glasses onto his nose, whispering, "I still see enough to remember who you were, even if you've forgotten me." One evening, Grace crept into Edward's room with a small notebook clutched to her chest. "I'm writing our story," she whispered. She opened the pages to show drawings. Edward in the garden, Edward reading bedtime tales, Edward smiling. Captions in wobbly handwriting read, "Granddad is kind. Granddad tells the best stories." Edward's eyes filled with tears. "You're giving me back my voice," he said softly. Grace hugged him tight, whispering, "I know what Mom says, but I know who you really are." Edward's heart swelled. Despite Amelia's cruelty, this little girl saw his truth. In her notebook, he was still whole, still the man who had once been loved. He kissed her hair gently, promising, "Never forget love, Grace. It's stronger than anger." She nodded solemnly. When she left, Edward sat holding the notebook as though it were gold. It was more than paper. It was a lifeline, proof that kindness still bloomed in the cracks of cruelty. He whispered into the silence, "This is my legacy, not her scorn, but your love." Edward longed to walk in the park. "Too cold," Amelia snapped whenever he asked. But one afternoon, while she was out, he pulled on his torn coat and slipped outside. The air stung his lungs, but freedom tasted sweeter than warmth. He shuffled slowly, each step a victory. In the park, bare trees reached skyward like prayers. Children played in the distance, their laughter carrying him back decades to when Amelia herself had swung from those same chains, squealing with joy. He lowered himself onto a bench, closed his eyes, and let the wind bite his cheeks. A stranger passing by smiled kindly, nodding as if to acknowledge his existence. Edward's chest lifted. For a few minutes he was not a burden, not invisible, just a man, alive, watching the world turn. When he returned, Amelia scolded him. "Reckless! What if you'd fallen?" Edward simply smiled. She didn't know that the walk had not broken him but restored him. In his heart, he carried that bench, that laughter, that brief taste of freedom. "You can't cage the soul," he whispered to himself as he shut his bedroom door. Tucked away in a small box lay Edward's most prized possession, a tarnished service medal from his youth. One quiet afternoon, he polished it, remembering the pride of wearing his uniform, the weight of duty he had once carried with honor. Amelia walked in, glanced at it, and scoffed. "Old junk," she muttered, tossing it aside carelessly. Edward picked it up, cradling it gently as though it were a fragile bird. It was not junk. It was proof of sacrifice, courage, a chapter of his life where he had stood tall. He remembered marching proudly, believing he was building a better future for his daughter. Now that medal meant nothing to her, yet everything to him. He tucked it back into his pocket, close to his heart, whispering, "You can laugh, Amelia, but this still tells me I mattered." The medal pressed against his chest like a heartbeat, a reminder that even if his daughter stripped him of dignity, he had lived with honor once. That truth could never be erased. He sat back in his chair, shoulders straighter, the medal's quiet weight giving him strength. Dinner was served again, but Edward felt invisible. Amelia and Charles chatted about their plans, laughing over holidays and money, never once glancing his way. Edward ate his plain slice of bread slowly, chewing as if it were a feast. The ache in his stomach was less than the ache in his heart, but across the table Grace noticed. She quietly slid half her potato onto his plate, her small hand brushing his under the cloth. Edward blinked, swallowing emotion along with the bite. That potato was more nourishing than the whole roast Amelia devoured. It was compassion served in secret. Amelia never noticed, lost in her own laughter. Edward caught Grace's eye and smiled, squeezing her hand beneath the table. In that moment, the silence around him cracked, replaced by something warmer. He savored not just the food, but the defiance of kindness. Later, lying in bed, he whispered, "Even scraps of love taste sweeter than a banquet of cruelty." His belly may have been half full, but his heart felt richer than it had in weeks. The house was filled with the aroma of baking. Edward watched from his armchair as Grace bustled around the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune. His granddaughter was making apple pie, her laughter echoing through the rooms like a melody that refused to be silenced. Grace, unlike her mother, Amelia, had a heart that understood the language of love. She knew how to nurture not just the body, but the soul. Edward smiled, his wrinkled face lighting up with warmth. Despite the taunts and indifference he faced from his own flesh and blood, he found solace in this tiny kitchen, where flour dusted the air and cinnamon sweetened the silence. Grace was his link to the world, a reminder that kindness was a universal language that transcended the barriers of blood and bone. He closed his eyes, inhaling the fragrance, cherishing the moments when love baked its way into the tapestry of life, filling the cracks with sweetness and light. Edward stumbled toward the garden gate, gripping it for support as he stared at the tangled mess before him. Where flowers once bloomed, now only weeds dared grow. "You won't get far," a voice snapped, pulling Edward from his thoughts. He turned slowly to see Amelia advancing, her face thunderous. She clutched his spare set of keys, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "Where were you?" she demanded. "Just walking," he murmured, his gaze drifting back to the garden. It had once been his pride, a patch of earth transformed by love into rows of roses, lavender and daffodils. But now weeds had crept across the beds. Memories of his life before Amelia flickered like flames in the wind, threatening to be extinguished by her icy stare. "Don't lie," she snarled. "Why did you go out? Do I need to call the police?" Edward flinched at the thought of them coming for him. They would look at him, an old man with shaking hands and cloudy eyes, and decide he posed no threat, no danger. "I went for a walk," he whispered, knowing she wouldn't believe him but unable to bear the accusation in her voice any longer. He shuffled past her, ignoring the slam of the door behind him. Once outside, the world overwhelmed him. Car horns blared, sirens wailed, and the rumble of traffic shook the ground beneath his feet. For a moment, he stood frozen, trying to anchor himself to the present. But all he could think of was the garden. The shears hung by the door, beckoning him to prune the unruly branches, to shape the shrubs that had become wild with neglect. He longed to feel the sun on his face as he planted bulbs in the spring, to inhale the sweet scent of the honeysuckle that climbed the trellis. Those memories were a balm to his troubled heart, but Amelia forbade him to touch her precious flowers. "You'll ruin it," she snapped when he asked to prune the shrubs. Edward sighed. He understood her desire to protect the garden, but it was his creation. He cared for those plants as he cared for her, and their withered state mirrored his own. He wanted to nurture them back to health, to watch them bloom anew. But Amelia remained skeptical. He reached for the gate latch, hoping to convince her. With trembling hands, he coaxed it open and stepped inside, drawn to the parched earth like a moth to a dying flame. "Stay away from my garden," Amelia commanded, noticing his approach. "It's mine. You can't just barge in here whenever you want." Edward froze. He didn't mean to intrude, but the sight of the overgrown foliage stirred something deep within him, a longing for a time when life teemed in this very spot. He swallowed his disappointment, turning slowly to face her. "Can I help you?" he asked hesitantly, hoping she might relent, give him a task among the weeds and tangled vines. Amelia scoffed, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. "Don't bother. You don't understand what needs to be done here." Then she added, almost triumphantly, "You shouldn't have wandered out of the house anyway. You're lucky I came looking for you. What if someone had seen you?" Edward nodded, understanding her concern. If people saw him, they would judge him, question his sanity. He was already a shadow, a whisper of his former self. The last thing he wanted was to become a spectacle, another puzzle in a world that refused to understand his fractured mind. The weight of her words settled upon him like a shroud, suffocating his hopes of finding solace in the one place that once brought him joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the overgrown garden, Edward retreated back to the silent confines of the house. He moved like a ghost, unseen and unheard, seeking refuge in the familiar corners where he could hide the tremors that racked his body. The world outside these four walls had become too chaotic, too jarring. Here, in the hushed quiet of their home, he could navigate the labyrinth of rooms without fear of being judged. The garden, once a sanctuary, now mocked him with its untamed growth, a stark reminder of what he had lost. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled the air, mingling with the musty odor of stale neglect. It clung to him like a shroud, wrapping him in the chilling embrace of solitude. As darkness descended, the shadows danced on the walls, twisting into monstrous shapes that prowled his waking nightmares. He huddled deeper into his worn armchair, seeking solace in its threadbare comfort, wishing he could disappear into the fabric of its faded upholstery. But there was no escape from the gnawing loneliness that echoed in the cavernous silence of the house. He closed his eyes, desperately trying to conjure images of Margaret, her gentle smile, her warm embrace, anything to banish the specter of Amelia that loomed over him. Yet, even in his memories, she was present, a dark stain on the canvas of his past, twisting the hues of joy into shades of gray. He longed to reach out, to touch something real, anything to break the spell of emptiness that threatened to consume him. But his hands trembled uncontrollably, betraying him, making his quest for solace seem like a futile grasp at shadows. As the night deepened, Edward succumbed to despair, defeated by the silence that screamed his isolation. He sank further into the abyss of his solitude, grappling to stay afloat in a sea of forgotten dreams and unmet needs. In the stillness, he heard whispers that sounded like Margaret's voice calling to him from beyond the veil. Were they real or figments of his wandering mind? Was this the haunting echo of a love lost, or the promise of reunion in some ethereal realm? Trapped in the twilight zone of his own existence, Edward drifted into a restless sleep, uncertain if he sought solace in dreams or feared awakening to reality's harsh embrace. Each night he battled against the encroaching darkness, clinging to the fragments of a life teetering on the edge of oblivion. Edward watched Grace through the kitchen doorway, her back to him as she stirred a pot on the stove. A faint smile touched his lips. Her every move radiated independence, yet there was a hint of shyness in the tilt of her shoulders, the way she occasionally paused, as if seeking his gaze. Suddenly, she turned, a questioning look on her face. "What did Mum tell you about me?" she asked softly. Edward's smile faded. He hadn't expected the question, and it struck him as an omen of the storm clouds gathering in Grace's young life. Her mother's coldness towards him inevitably spilled over onto their daughter. "Your mum told me nothing bad," Edward replied, his voice gentle. "She's a wonderful girl, Grace. Kind, strong, smart, just like you were at her age." Grace's eyes, wide and trusting, met his. "But why does she treat you like a bad person?" Edward's heart ached at the question, and he struggled to find an answer that would not plant seeds of doubt or disillusionment in the child's mind. He didn't want Grace to see him as a victim, nor did he wish to burden her with the complexities of his situation. "Sometimes," he began, searching for the right words, "people misunderstand each other. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they need to try harder to understand." Grace seemed satisfied with the response, and Edward's relief was evident in the sigh that escaped his lips. He walked over and sat down next to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You know," he said, "your mum used to be just like you, full of energy, curiosity, a thirst for life. She never backed down from a challenge." Grace beamed, clearly delighted by the positive image of her mother that Edward was painting. "Do you think I'm like her?" she asked, her eyes shining with admiration. Edward's smile returned, this time tinged with melancholy. "More than anyone else, Grace, you remind me of your mother. Your spirit, your kindness, the way you face the world. It's all her, all those years ago." Grace listened intently, absorbing her father's words, her young mind piecing together fragments of a past she couldn't quite grasp. At that moment, Edward felt a profound sense of connection with his granddaughter, a bond that transcended the physical resemblance and delved into the realm of shared experiences and emotions. The rain continued throughout the night, drumming a relentless tattoo on the roof, each drop a tiny hammer blow, each gust a mournful cry. Inside, Edward lay awake, the storm mirroring the tempest in his soul. Sleep had fled, leaving him in the cold grip of reality. The silence between him and the woman he once loved was deafening, and then a soft knock on the door broke the stillness. Startled, Edward turned to Margaret's side of the bed, expecting to see their daughter standing there, a sheepish grin on her face. But it was Grace, her brow furrowed with concern. "Did you sleep at all, Granddad?" she whispered, her silhouette framed in the dim glow of the hallway light. Edward managed a weak smile, the effort draining the little strength he had left. "I did, my love. Thank you for your concern." His voice, however, betrayed him, raspy and hollow. It echoed the emptiness that had become his life. Grace didn't speak, didn't ask any questions. Instead, she climbed into the bed beside him, offering comfort without a word. There, in the suffocating quiet of their home, surrounded by ghosts of laughter and love, Edward poured his heart out to his granddaughter. He told her about the dreams that haunted him, of the fear that gnawed at his insides, and in her gentle eyes he saw understanding, saw empathy that belied her tender years. As the first pale fingers of dawn crept through the curtains, Grace slipped away as quietly as she had come, leaving Edward alone with his thoughts and the lingering warmth of human touch. When Amelia entered the room later, her face a mask of indifference, she found Edward propped up in bed, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. The sight of him, so fragile, so defeated, stirred something deep within her. But it was a feeling she refused to acknowledge, pushed down with practiced ease. "Are you feeling better?" she asked, her tone devoid of warmth. But Edward heard the tremor in her voice, the flicker of emotion in her eyes. He knew she cared, but her world was one where feelings were burdens, best left unsaid, unexpressed. So he offered her a tired smile, a sad acceptance of his fate. "Just a little stiff, that's all," he croaked, his throat raw from disuse. Amelia inclined her head, her gaze drifting to the door. Neither of them spoke as she busied herself around the room, moving with mechanical precision. To the outside world, they were a picture of domesticity, but behind the closed doors of that room, shadows danced in the corners. Unspoken words hung heavy in the air, thick with unshed tears and buried truths. Edward watched Amelia move with a strange mixture of tenderness and pity. The woman he had loved had become a stranger, hardened by grief, encased in a shell of her own making. In her stiff movements, in the tightness of her jaw, he saw the echoes of the vibrant young woman he had known, a woman who had loved him once, too. The irony was not lost on him. Just as he had once vowed to protect Margaret, now he found himself shielding Amelia from the wreckage of their shared past. But the weight of their history pressed down on him, threatening to crush the fragile hope he clung to. The doctor's words echoed in his ears, each syllable a nail hammered into the coffin of his dreams. 6 months. He had been given 6 months to live. And what did he have to show for those stolen months? A broken marriage, a fractured relationship with his daughter, and a growing distance from the only person who still offered him solace. When Grace came to check on him that evening, she found Edward staring at the floor, his face drawn and haggard. Seeing the worry crease her young forehead, he forced a smile, willing her to see past the physical weakness to the strength that still resided in his heart. "Just a bad day, my love," he murmured, reaching out to stroke her hair. But Grace wasn't fooled. She knelt beside him, her eyes searching his face with an intensity that belied her years. "Tell me, Granddad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Will I see you again?" In that instant, the dam broke. Edward's composure crumbled, replaced by a torrent of emotion. With shaking hands, he reached for hers, the coolness of her skin grounding him in the present. "Of course you will, my darling," he choked out, his voice ragged with unshed tears. "Don't be silly." Yet his words rang hollow even to his own ears. How could he promise anything when his own journey was shrouded in uncertainty? But before he could delve deeper into the labyrinth of his deceit, Amelia cleared her throat sharply, her voice cutting through the tension like a shard of glass. "Enough of this sentimentality," she snapped. "It's getting late. Edward, you need your rest." But Grace didn't budge. She held on to her grandfather's hand, her gaze unwavering. "No, Mom," she said, her voice suddenly strong. "Granddad needs me. He doesn't need you right now." Amelia recoiled as if struck, her face ashen. For a moment the room was silent, the only sound the rain lashing against the windows. Then Amelia whirled around, her eyes flashing with anger. "How dare you!" she hissed, but her voice lacked conviction. Her usual sharpness was dulled, replaced by a confused vulnerability. Ignoring her, Grace turned back to Edward, her small hand tightening its grip on his. "Will I see you again, Granddad?" she repeated, her voice softer now, filled with a wisdom that belied her years. Edward looked into her innocent eyes, searching for the right words to quell the turmoil within her. He wanted to shield her from the harsh realities of life, but how could he do that when he himself was drowning in the depths of despair? With a trembling hand, he reached up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a stray tear that had escaped her lashes. "You will always see me, my love," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "No matter where you go or what you do, our bond cannot be severed. You are a part of me, and I will always be a part of you." His words hung in the air, a fragile lifeline thrown into the storm-tossed sea of her innocence. Could she grasp it? Would she find solace in the promise of their enduring connection, or would the harsh winds of reality tear it away? As Edward looked into Grace's tear-filled eyes, he prayed that she would hold on to his words, cherish them, for they held the essence of his love, the legacy he wished to leave behind.